Hi, okay, today I want to talk about a common amino acid that's very popular in bodybuilding. You see it in a lot of supplements. It's found in all protein foods, and it's called arginine. Now, arginine is most familiar to bodybuilders as being a precursor for a substance called nitric oxide, which is a type of gas that's produced in the body that among other functions, it dilates arteries. Therefore, it could possibly increase muscle pump and also increase oxygen delivery to muscles. Uh, there's other ways to increase nitric oxide, such as drinking beet juice and taking citrulline, but those would be the topics of another video. In this video, I want to focus on arginine. Arginine first came to prominence probably, I'd say, in the late 80s. There was a book called Life Extension written by Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw. And in the book, they discussed arginine as a promoter of growth hormone release. In fact, one of the authors talked about how taking larger doses of arginine seemed to increase, she had broken some bones, seemed to increase the healing dramatically. And growth hormone is known to dramatically increase the healing of connective tissue. In fact, this is the reason why athletes, not necessarily bodybuilders, but athletes use growth hormone to maintain and help rehabilitate connective tissue. Again, that's another subject. I don't want to go off on tangents here. But anyway, the book popularized the use of arginine. However, there's a couple of things to remember in relation to growth hormone release with arginine. I'll get into more details in a minute, but first, let me tell you that to get to really boost growth hormone with arginine usually requires an intravenous administration of arginine, and the doses given are usually between 12 and 30 grams. Given usually about 30 grams of arginine, it usually almost always provokes a definite growth hormone release. In fact, it's used as a provocation test, especially in children who are suspected of growth hormone deficiency. They'll put an IV in the arm, and it will be a dosage of about 20 grams of arginine. And if it provokes a growth hormone release, then the child is not deficient in growth hormone. The same goes for adults. If there is no growth hormone release, usually it means there's a problem with the growth hormone system. Arginine stimulates growth hormone release. It requires a little bit of an explanation. Growth hormone release is governed by two proteins released in the brain. One of them is called somatostatin, which inhibits growth hormone release. The other one's called growth hormone releasing hormone. Obviously, the growth hormone releasing hormone is the one that provokes growth hormone release. Usually, they're in fairly good balance. When your growth hormone levels get to a certain point, somatostatin is released to prevent excess amounts of growth hormone release. Because if you had excessive growth hormone release, you'd have symptoms such as acromegaly and giantism. People that are over, let's say, 7'5" usually get that way because of an excess of growth hormone when they're younger. It's called giantism. Uh, so anyway, growth arginine works by blocking somatostatin. And as people get older, the balance between somatostatin and growth hormone releasing hormone kind of leans towards the somatostatin side. So they tend to be actually produce less growth hormone. Let's say, I think it's 14% per decade past the age of 40, if I remember correctly. And this is again caused by an increase of somatostatin in relation to growth hormone releasing hormone. And there's ways around that. Again, I've covered this in other videos. For example, growth hormone releasing peptides will actually counter the somatostatin effect. An important point to remember is, unlike testosterone, which tends to decrease with age, the production of growth hormone never decreases. Your pituitary gland is always synthesizing growth hormone. In fact, the pituitary gland contains 8% growth hormone by weight. What happens, though, is as you get older, again, the somatostatin blocks the growth hormone release. So, if you did something to kind of block somatostatin, you can revert your growth hormone back to the way it was in teenage years, see? Or, of course, you could always just take growth hormone injections, which also bypasses the somatostatin. But let's talk a little bit about arginine. Arginine is what they call a conditionally essential amino acid, which means that normally it could be produced in the body from other amino acids and other substances. However, under certain conditions, the body cannot produce enough arginine. This would be conditions like post-surgery, severe burns, anything that's usually involves protein catabolism or breakdown requires extra arginine because the body can't keep up with the need for arginine. There's other conditional amino acids you probably heard of. Taurine is one of them, and so is glutamine, meaning these amino acids, again, can be normally synthesized in the body, but under certain high-stress conditions, you do require an extra amount. Now, how much? Most people ingest about between 5 and 6 grams a day of arginine in various high-protein foods. So and another thing to remember is that you don't absorb arginine completely for two reasons. You actually absorb about 60% of an oral dose of arginine. The reason is the gut or the splanchnic tissue, that's the tissue in your gut, they tend to kind of absorb arginine just like they love to absorb glutamine. So a lot of the arginine doesn't get into the bloodstream because it's used by the intestinal cells. Another barrier is an enzyme called arginase, which is also produced in the gut and in the liver, and arginase functions to break down arginine. So if you add it all up, about 40% of any oral dose of arginine just doesn't get into your blood. So you do get 60% of the dose, though. Now, the upper limit of oral arginine is estimated to be 20 grams a day. But you would never want to take 20 grams a day because studies have shown as soon as you take oral doses of 12 grams a day or more of arginine, a large percentage of people who do this will get gastrointestinal symptoms, including nausea and vomiting. This is the reason why most of those nitric oxide boosting supplements that are sold, which are based on arginine, because arginine is the direct precursor for nitric oxide. In other words, when arginine does get into the blood, it encounters enzymes called nitric oxide synthetase enzymes. There's 3 different kinds. As soon as it encounters this enzyme, it's converted into nitric oxide. See, however, I got off on a tangent there, and I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, you see, the problem is that if you take more than let's say 12 grams, you get this kind of nausea feeling, and you wind up not using any of the arginine because you're vomiting it out. Okay, but what are the functions of arginine? Some of the established functions are the detoxification of ammonia. When you consume protein, the nitrogen that is not, protein is unique from, let's say, carbohydrates and fats because it contains 16% nitrogen. And when you're taking a lot of protein, not all the protein is used, and a lot of it has to be broken down and excreted. The nitrogen portion of protein is converted into a substance called urea. This occurs in the liver. The reason it's converted to the reason it's converted to urea is water soluble and can be excreted by the kidneys. And arginine plays a very, very prominent role in what they call the urea cycle, which is the conversion of nitrogenous byproducts of protein metabolism into urea. This is very important because ammonia, if it builds up, is very toxic. A large amount of ammonia, if it gets into your brain, can actually cause you to go into a coma. Another function of arginine is that it's what they call a glucogenic amino acid. It can be converted in the liver in a process called gluconeogenesis. It can be converted into glucose. For example, if you have hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, your body can, if you have any arginine circulating, it can travel to the liver where the liver will turn it into glucose and therefore elevate your glucose level. Also, another famous role of arginine is that it's one of 3 amino acids that's used in the synthesis of creatine. The other 2 amino acids are methionine and glycine. Arginine is probably the most important of the 3 amino acids in the synthesis of the synthesis of creatine, which occurs in the liver, pancreas, and kidneys. Uh, the the body does this all the time. It produces about a gram of creatine a day. You wouldn't want to take arginine as a stimulator of creatine because it really doesn't do much. I mean, you're only going to get about a gram out of it. You better off just taking a creatine a supplement. Uh, Arginine is also involved in a byproduct of arginine, I should say, or metabolite is called citrulline, which is it's not, citrulline is not used in muscle protein synthesis as is arginine, but it has a couple of interesting functions. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, the problem with ingesting oral arginine is that it has a number of barriers that block its entry into the blood, such as arginase enzyme, and its use by the intestinal cells. Now, citrulline, when you ingest citrulline itself, the citrulline in the kidneys is converted into arginine, and by doing so, it bypasses the usual arginine oral blocks that, for example, the arginase enzyme and the intestinal cell use of arginine. It bypasses that completely. So ingesting citrulline, it'll travel in the blood to the kidneys where it's converted to arginine. Then the arginine goes into the blood, and the arginine, again, as soon as it hits those NO or nitric oxide enzymes, it will be converted into nitric oxide. So citrulline is actually a more reliable way of boosting nitric oxide than is arginine itself, again, because of those formidable barriers. Arginine, also another byproduct of arginine, is ornithine. Ornithine was a very popular amino acid years ago among bodybuilders, let's say in the 80s, because it was promoted as a growth hormone releaser. And in fact, it's actually twice as effective as arginine in promoting growth hormone release. But again, it's a kind of iffy proposition for reasons I'll get into later, I should say. I didn't have my coffee yet, so I'm having a little brain fog here. Excuse me. But another possible another metabolite of arginine is something called aganamine, and aganamine is showing up in various agmatine. I'm mispronouncing it. Agmatine. Agmatine is showing up in various supplements, which I find interesting because it's touted as a nitric oxide booster, which is very interesting because if you check the biochemistry of this substance, it actually blocks nitric oxide synthesis. So it's actually one of the worst things you could take if you're looking to increase nitric oxide. As I said earlier, if you're looking to use arginine as a growth hormone booster, you'd be much better off relying on an intravenous administration because of the reasons I cited earlier. However, there has been some studies that show that oral arginine did boost growth hormone release. One of the most famous studies involved, I believe it was cyclists, this is many years ago, where they gave them 1.2 grams of arginine and 1.2 grams of another amino acid called lysine, and this led to a 800-fold increase in arginine. I think it was 90 minutes after the oral intake of these two amino acids. Now, strangely enough, when they gave the two amino acids, arginine and lysine, when they gave them separately, neither one of them had any effect at all on growth hormone release. It's still a mystery. Nobody knows why combining it. However, when they tried to several studies tried to replicate this original study, one study did find a 2.7 times increase in growth hormone after taking arginine and lysine. About 3 or 4 other studies found no effect whatsoever. So that's a kind of, again, I wouldn't depend on arginine and lysine as a growth hormone releaser. Now, why doesn't arginine always work as a growth hormone releaser? This is something that's frequently overlooked. For your own body's growth hormone to be released, certain conditions have to be met. You have to have low blood glucose. You have to have low fatty acids in your blood, and you have to have no other amino acids to compete with arginine. So in other words, if you take arginine within proximity of a meal, and that expecting a growth hormone release, you're not going to get anything. This is why years ago, arginine as a growth hormone releaser was always suggested to take at night before going to sleep, because it assumed that your last meal was consumed at least 4 hours before sleep. So again, if you take arginine on a full stomach or with any nutrients in your blood, there'll be zero release of growth hormone, nothing whatsoever. Another interesting thing about arginine is a study that showed it was a young men involved in weight training, and they gave a 7-gram dose of arginine either before a workout or at rest. Interesting thing happened in this study. When they gave the 7 grams of arginine prior to exercise, the arginine inhibited the natural release of growth hormone that occurs with exercise. It actually blocked the release of growth hormone during exercise. But when they gave the same dose, 7 grams of arginine, at rest, away from training, they had a 115% increase in growth hormone that peaked an hour after ingestion and lasted for 2 to 3 hours. So again, this is a mystery. Nobody really knows why arginine inhibits growth hormone release during exercise, but be aware that it does. And also, you probably don't want to use a nitric oxide booster before a workout, because if it did, it might also interfere with anabolic signaling factors that occur when the blood is somewhat occluded. There's a increase in metabolites. It's called metabolic stress that tends to increase anabolic effects, and a huge amount of nitric oxide produced at the same time would actually inhibit this process. I should also point out that people that are over 40, not only do they produce less growth hormone naturally because of the somatostatin effect, but they also are far less sensitive to using oral supplements that are purported to increase growth hormones, such as arginine. So, if you have a lot of body fat, you will also get just about no effect at all from any possible growth hormone releaser. You'd have to take actual growth hormone injections to get any growth hormone effect. What else can I tell you here? Let me see. Oh, there was a 2011 study, one of the most recent studies. It involved 14 young men. All of them were engaged in weight training. They were provided with both high and low doses of arginine prior to working out, and they were tested for various hormones and nitric oxide. They found that both doses of arginine, both the low dose and the high dose, did increase blood concentration of arginine. However, levels of growth hormone, IGF-1, nitric oxide, or insulin was not affected at all by the intake of arginine, which is kind of curious because normally arginine does stimulate an insulin secretion. I would not rule out arginine. I definitely would not say it's junk because some emerging studies, and they're animal studies to tell you the truth, show that arginine in animals seems to have a remarkable effect on reducing body fat. And it does this by actually stimulating what they call brown adipose tissue, brown fat. Brown fat is kind of like it's a thermogenic fat that it's almost like having your own built-in DNP system. I did a video on DNP, which basically is a substance that converts calories into heat. Well, brown fat does the same thing because it contains an abundance of mitochondria. This is what makes it brown. It gives it like a reddish color. And the mitochondria in turn have certain proteins called uncoupling proteins that act exactly like DNP, converting calories into heat. Now, they don't know whether this effect occurs in humans, but it's actually quite potent in animals. Nobody has really, I don't think, tested this in humans yet, but it may be that providing a certain dose of arginine might be able to help you control obesity and lose body fat. It's very, very early research. It's a possibility. And also, I just want to comment, are certain new forms of supplemental arginine, for arginine esters, a couple of things like this that are reputed to have as much as a 10 times greater absorption rate over normal, let's say free-form arginine. There's a couple of studies have shown this to be true. However, these studies were sponsored entirely by companies that sell these particular supplements. So I would kind of wait until there's some independent confirmation that these particular arginine supplements are superior to the, let's say, plain vanilla arginine hydrochloride, that kind of stuff, the salt or free-form arginine that are usually available. So I think that's about it for arginine. If you want more information on substances like arginine, nitric oxide, fat loss, exercise science, hormonal therapy, ergogenic aids, fat loss research, anti-aging, I cover this all in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. It's a monthly publication. It's 40 to 50 pages every month, more like an ebook. And I guarantee you will learn something. It'll clear up all the confusion you have about nutrition and exercise. There is no advertisements. It's pure, utter truth. Among the articles I have coming up, I'm going to have a update on all of the available fat-burning supplements, reputed fat-burning supplements, and I'm going to tell you which ones actually work and which ones are a complete waste of money. And just reading my newsletter will save you a lot of money, because I regularly expose the supplements that are a total waste of money. So you can subscribe at www.appliedmetabolics.com. Thank you for listening.